The Book TV bus is traveling the country, visiting bookstores, libraries, festivals, and authors. Here are some of the people and places we visited.
We're here at the West Virginia Book Festival with author Davitt McAteer. His book is Monongah.
It's really a story about the times and about the events of the days and the importance of the mining industry at the time, but more about the people and about how they went through this terribly difficult experience and were able to survive and live in this country after this accident occurred.
Tell us about some of these people.
These are interesting people because it's the immigration period beginning in the late 1880s, 1890s, and the immigration now has shifted, and it's away from the Northern European immigration, away from the Irish, say, and the English, over to the Italians, the Southern Europeans, to the Greeks, to some of the Turkish crowd, also to the Eastern Bloc, the Polish Empire, which is then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and these folks are escaping real poverty because the country had gone through, the European continent was going through one of its series of internal wars, and there was a lot of drafting of these young men, and the option was to come to the United States and work in the mines. And so they left and took a boat, and 3 weeks later come to work in an underground mine setting they have no experience in. Their families had no background in. They've been farmers for centuries, and it's really an interesting story about the transition. We were able to uncover some records which we were able to document how they traveled, what boat they got on, where they landed. Many of them landed in New York and Baltimore, and then boarded the B&O train, which took them over to the mines, and they went into the company houses. They went down to the company store. They bought the equipment from the company that they had to pay for, and then went underground and began working. And so it's a very foreign world, but how they adapted and how they learned how to live in this country. And then this accident is laid on top of it. And this accident is a terrible disaster in the sense that it is the mine company puts a great deal of money in the production side of the coal mine, but very little emphasis on the safety side of the coal mine. So when an ignition occurs, there's a tremendous amount of coal dust on the ground in the mine. That coal dust becomes airborne. It ignites and blows the mine entirely apart. There are 5 survivors out of 550 that were in. There were 5 survivors who lived through the process and who then were part of the inquest in the story. And this is the tale about that inquest. It's also a tale about the relief committee that was set up to help these families. The disaster occurred December 6, 1907, and the families are destitute because they've been getting paid each day you got paid. It was a pay-as-you-go. And so the women and their children have no money. And there's a committee set up that solicits money from throughout the country and raises $156,000 for these families, and then provides that for the income. But they have to move out of the houses because they're in company houses, and new miners are brought in to replace them. So they're now on their own, and it's a very difficult story. And so we tell part of that story as well. But it's really a story about the human spirit. The one of the widows survives, and the committee that I mentioned, the relief committee, suggested that she wasn't capable of taking it, that they were going to dole out the money to her on a monthly basis over years. And she was very resourceful and went to, the only way you could get the money given is if you said you were going back to the old country. She went up to the priest and got a note from him, and got a note from a travel agent that said she was going to go back. She took the money, and that family still lives in Monongah today. And so it's a wonderful human story about just the willingness to fight back and the willingness to try to make it in this country after very, very tragic circumstances. But it's also a story about how the mine safety law in this country begins. This is a story about the largest accident, which leads to the passage of the Bureau of Mines in 1910, and then leads to the beginnings, very faint beginnings, and we have to kill another 100,000 people, but the beginnings of the mine safety laws in the country, so that we have, these men are connected to the conditions in the mines today. And I think that's also a very important part of this story.
How did you become involved in this story?
I'm from West Virginia. I'm from a mining town. I'm from a mining family. Some of my ancestors were in this mine. One of the survivors, not one that was underground, but one of the men who was injured on the surface, was a great uncle of mine. And so there was some history to it. but it was more because of the work that I've done in mine safety. In the Clinton administration, I was head of the regulatory agency for the nation on mine systems and for mines, and I have been involved in mine safety for 30 years or so. And so this, I went to this story first because of its legal implication. The story was how the law begins and how it evolves. But once I got to that side of it, then I began to run into these people. So I'd run into an individual and I'd say, I know where you live, I know what house you're in, and you have a brother. And then once you begin to know, it becomes so fascinating. And then the drama of the story, if you would, is that the company wants to reduce the casualty count. They want to reduce the number. There are 550 or so killed, and they try to push down and try to manipulate the number by having some members of their staff suggest to the press a different number, a lower number. And we were able to uncover this in effect cover-up by the management of the mines to try and reduce the number. They didn't want to be the biggest industrial accident in American history. They wanted to have that to be somebody else, but they wanted to have this number down. So the president of the company comes and says, oh, there were only 200 and some in the mine. But the superintendent who was there at the time says, oh no. Privately, he says, this number is much higher, and it's higher than the official number. The official number is 362 today, but the number that we came up with is roughly 525 to 550. And we back that up with an analysis of the records and analysis of who was left off the death rolls. And so it's really kind of an interesting story. That's the investigative part of this journalist effort.
Author Davitt McAteer, his book is Monongah.
For more information about the Book TV Bus, visit our website at booktv.org/booktvbus.